Erie, Pennsylvania.
Table of Contents, Erie.
All about Erie, Pennsylvania. With visiting and touring information. Geography. History. Attractions. And author points of interest.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. drsydney22@gmail.com. 2022. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltove. For a more complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to this video using the link here.
Chapter 1. Introduction to Erie. This is the flag of the city of Erie, Pennsylvania.
Erie is an industrial city on the shore of Lake Erie in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania. Erie is Pennsylvania's primary access point to Lake Erie, the Great Lakes, and the St. Lawrence Seaway.
The city of Erie is named for the lake and the Native American tribe that resided along the lake's southern shore.
Erie is the fifth largest city in Pennsylvania after Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Allentown, and Reading, with a population of 95,000. Erie's metropolitan area consists of approximately 271,000 residents. Erie is the seat of government for Erie County. Erie emerged as a maritime center after the American Revolution, then as a railroad hub during the Great American westward expansion. Erie became an important city for iron and steel manufacturing and thrived well into the 20th century with big industry. Erie is in proximity to Cleveland, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh. Once teeming with heavy industry, Erie's heavy manufacturing sector now consists mainly of plastics and locomotive building.
This shows Erie in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania on the shores of Lake Erie. Chapter 2. Presque State Park.
A major recreational attraction of Erie is the Presque State Park.
This is a satellite view of Erie and Presque State Park.
More than 4 million people each year visit Presque State Park for water recreation, and a new casino named for the state park is growing in popularity. Erie is known as the flagship city because of the presence of Oliver Hazard Perry's flagship Niagara. Erie has also been called the Gem City because of the sparkling lake.
The modern U.S. brig Niagara is a museum ship and sail training vessel located at the Erie Maritime Museum. The Niagara is a reconstruction of the first U.S. brig Niagara, a brig that played a pivotal role in the Battle of Lake Erie and the victory of Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry during the War of 1812. The Niagara is also one of the last two ships remaining from the War of 1812, with the other being the USS Constitution.
Chapter 3. The History of Erie. We will next have a short video clip about the history of Erie, Pennsylvania.
Erie was founded in 1795 after the purchase of the Erie Triangle, a tract of land that Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts were each trying to acquire. It finally went to Pennsylvania for 75 cents an acre and now comprises a large part of present-day Erie County. The water off the coast of the Erie Triangle is known as the graveyard of Lake Erie because of the large number of shipwrecks that occurred in the stormy waters during the 18th and 19th centuries. Erie is known as the flagship city after Oliver Hazard Perry's flagship Niagara. Perry was an officer in the U.S. Navy and considered a hero for leading American forces to victory during the Battle of Lake Erie in the War of 1812. Visitors can experience Erie's history by visiting the Erie History Center and the Erie Maritime Museum, both located in downtown Erie. We invite you to Erie, a community that celebrates its past, enjoys its present, and looks positively to the future.
The Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy and the Seneca Nation occupied the lands now known as Erie.
The French built Fort Presque near present-day Erie in 1753, as part of their effort to garrison New France against the encroaching English.
The French word presque means peninsula, literally almost an island, and refers to that piece of land that juts into Lake Erie that is now called Presque State Park.
When the French abandoned the fort in 1760, it was their last post west of Niagara. The British occupied the fort at Presque that same year, 3 years before the 7 Years' War ended in 1763.
Present-day Erie would have been situated in a disputed triangle of land claimed by the states of New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, as part of its Western Reserve, and Massachusetts.
The triangle lands problematically fell under neither New York nor Pennsylvania's charter. Connecticut and Massachusetts also spoke up with claims derived from their original colonial sea-to-sea grants. Of these 4 competing claimants, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, only Pennsylvania was landlocked. Following some pressure from the new federal government, all 4 states surrendered their claims, and in 1792, turned around and sold final rights to the Erie Triangle to Pennsylvania for $152,000 or 75 cents per acre. The Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy released the land to Pennsylvania in January 1789, for payments of $2,000 from Pennsylvania and $1,200 from the federal government. The Seneca Nation separately settled land claims against Pennsylvania in February 1791 for the sum of $800.
Present-day Erie would have been situated in a disputed triangle of land claimed by Connecticut as part of its Western Reserve.
This shows the resolution of the land claims in the West by the states of the original 13 colonies.
The initial settlement of the area began in 1795. Colonel Seth Reed and his family moved to the Erie area from Geneva, New York, and became the first European settlers of Erie.
Chapter 4. Erie in the War of 1812.
President James Madison ordered the construction of a naval fleet at Erie to wrest control of Lake Erie from the British during the War of 1812.
Noted shipbuilders Daniel Dobbins of Erie and Noah Brown of New York led the construction of 4 schooner-rigged gunboats and 2 brigs. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry led the squadron to success in the historic Battle of Lake Erie. The brig Niagara played an important role in the Battle of Lake Erie and the history of Erie. We will next have a short video clip about the War of 1812.
America was caught in the middle of these so-called Napoleonic Wars. Our War of 1812 with England was, in British eyes, but a minor aspect of the gigantic struggle against France. The British bottled up our coasts down to the last inlet to prevent our trading with France. Even our coastal shipping was halted. At sea, American frigates, Yankee-designed and Yankee-built and very good, fought British frigates from the South Pacific to the North Atlantic, winning more often than not. The most memorable victory was that of Constitution, Old Ironsides, over Guerriere. Constitution's capture of the sloop of war Java stirred another bit of prideful excitement. On the other hand, HMS Shannon beat and captured our Chesapeake. It was also a war of freshwater navies. Control of the Great Lakes was critical to British invasion from Canada. On Lake Erie, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry fought the British squadron to the point where he could declare, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." The word sent a shiver of pride through the new nation and into history. It was the war of the rocket's red glare and the flag that was still there, even though Washington itself was destined for burning.
This is the Battle of Lake Erie by William H. Powell, painted in 1865, showing Oliver Hazard Perry transferring from the U.S. brig Lawrence to the U.S. brig Niagara. The Battle of Lake Erie, sometimes called the Battle of Put-in-Bay, was fought in September 1813 in Lake Erie off the coast of Ohio during the War of 1812 and was one of the biggest naval battles of that war.
9 vessels of the United States Navy defeated and captured 6 ships of Great Britain's Royal Navy. This ensured American control of the lake for the remainder of the war, allowing the Americans to recover Detroit and win the Battle of the Thames to break the Indian Confederation of Tecumseh.
Erie's importance gradually faded through the 1900s as the age of lake trade and commercial fishing drew to a close. Downtown Erie continued to grow for most of the 20th century, before a major population downturn in the 1970s. With the advent of the automobile age, thousands of residents left Erie for suburbs such as Mill Creek Township, which now has over 50,000 people.
The Bicentennial Towhee is an observation towhee located in Erie and features panoramic views of Lake Erie, Presque State Park, and downtown Erie.
The Bicentennial Tower was built to signify the city's bicentennial year in 1996. It is 187 feet tall and has 2 observation decks. It is at the end of State Street on Dobbins Landing.
Chapter 5. The Economy of Erie. Erie is in the heart of the Rust Belt and has begun to focus on tourism as a driving force in its economy. The Rust Belt, sometimes called the Manufacturing Belt, is an area in parts of the northeastern United States, mid-Atlantic states, and portions of the upper Midwest.
The Rust Belt region is broadly defined as the region beginning west of the Boston-Washington, D.C. corridor and running west to Minnesota, particularly the city of Duluth and the Iron Range. Because the area's economy was defined by the steel industry and other heavy manufacturing, Minnesota, with its massive iron mining operations integral to steel, is often considered to be where the Rust Belt begins.
While only diesel-electric locomotive building remains from the ranks of the large manufacturers in the early 21st century, a more diverse mix of mid-sized industries has emerged. This broader economic base includes not only smaller and more agile steel and plastic plants, but also a vibrant service sector, health, insurance, and tourism.
Erie is the corporate headquarters of GE Transportation, Plastic Industries Incorporated, and the Erie Insurance Group. Over 10% of the nation's plastics are manufactured or finished in Erie-based plastics plants. Erie is an emerging center for biofuels and environmental research, producing over 45 million gallons of biofuel annually.
Tourism plays an increasingly important role in the local economy, with over 4 million people visiting Presque State Park and other attractions. Canadian shoppers frequent the Mill Creek Mall and Peach Street stores and attractions mostly because of Pennsylvania's tax exemption on clothing.
Presque State Park is a Pennsylvania state park on an arching sandy peninsula that juts into Lake Erie, 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers, west of the city of Erie. The peninsula sweeps northeastward, surrounding Presque Bay along the park's southern coast.
Presque State Park has 13 miles, 21 kilometers, of roads, 21 miles, 34 kilometers, of recreational trails, 13 beaches for swimming, and a marina. Popular activities at the park include swimming, boating, hiking, biking, and bird watching.
Chapter 6. The Erie Maritime Museum.
The Erie Maritime Museum is a maritime museum located on Presque Bay in downtown Erie and opened in 1998.
The museum is the home port of the U.S. brig Niagara, a modern recreation of the U.S. brig Niagara that fought in the Battle of Lake Erie.
This is the U.S. brig Niagara, a modern recreation of the USS brig Niagara that fought in the Battle of Lake Erie.
The museum offers a wide range of multimedia and interactive exhibits coupled with lively interpretive programs that vividly illustrate the region's rich maritime heritage.
When in homeport, the ship herself is the major exhibit, berthed within yards of the museum. The Niagara is visible from the building's bayside picture window.
Centerpiece exhibits of the museum are a former steam-powered electricity generating station and a reconstruction of the midship section of the USS Lawrence.
The replicated Lawrence, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry's first flagship during the Battle of Lake Erie, comes complete with mast, spars, and rigging to foster hands-on learning in the ways of sail handling. We will next have a short video clip about the Battle of Lake Erie.
The War of 1812 was a very, very important conflict in the United States history, especially in the area of Upper Canada. The area of Upper Canada, the section just above Ohio, just above Lake Erie, was the center of all military activity from 1812, 1813, and 1814. The Battle of Lake Erie is crucially important to the outcome of the War of 1812. For whoever controls the Great Lakes
can control Upper Canada and ultimately even the Old Northwest Territory itself. For that reason, the United States must confront Great Britain on the Great Lakes, on Lake Erie, and it must defeat them and drive them from the lake. These two great naval enemies will finally confront each other on Lake Erie on the 10th of September, 1813.
Oliver Hazard Perry was a young naval officer from Rhode Island. At the outset of the war, Oliver Hazard Perry was serving in active command on the Atlantic seaboard. There wasn't a whole lot going on the Atlantic seaboard in 1812 and early 1813, so Oliver Hazard Perry wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Navy and asked to be transferred to the Great Lakes, where more action was taking place. Presque Isle in Erie, Pennsylvania was a beehive of activity in 1813. It was the center where Oliver Hazard Perry was centering his construction of his squadron. Two of his ships, the Lawrence and the Niagara, were both totally constructed at Presque Isle. The other ships of Perry's fleet all came from different squadrons on different sections of the Great Lakes. Now, Presque Isle was very, very important for two reasons. Number one, it was a totally natural naval base. One of the major problems, though, with Presque Isle, the ships had to be very low draft. If the ships were deep draft, like an ocean-going vessel, they could never get over the sandbar that blocked the mouth of the harbor from Lake Erie. The problem, when Perry's fleet was completed, the Lawrence and the Niagara both were stuck in the harbor of Presque Isle. They couldn't get over the sandbar. So they had to build wooden boxes that they called camels. They took these wooden boxes and they sank them in the water beneath the ships, one on each side. And then they flooded them. They filled them full of water and they placed a big log or a beam across the top of them underneath the ships. And then the men had to pump with old hand pumps, pump the water out of these boxes to fill them full of air. When they were filled with air, they rose up just enough that the men could actually push the ship several feet at a time. This took hours. It took over 24 hours to get one of the ships over the sandbar. It took almost 2 full days to get both the Lawrence and the Niagara over the sandbar, prepared for battle against the British squadron on Lake Erie. James Lawrence was killed in action fighting against the British ship the Chesapeake in early 1813. While he was dying, he gives the famous words to his crew, "Don't give up the ship, fight her to the last." And then the gentleman passes away. Very good friend of Oliver Hazard Perry's, very good friend of the Navy's. One of the things that Perry does is he constructs, or has constructed, a very famous battle flag, the slogan that you see here behind me. The battle flag is to be used as a signal, and at 10 o'clock on the evening of September 9th, while Perry and all of his men are in the cabin of the Lawrence, going over the plan of attack for the next day, Perry unfolds this very famous 10-foot square wool flag with the inscription, "Don't give up the ship." Immediately when this flag is shown the next day in battle, it gives the signal that the entire American squadron will close action and attack the British. Robert Barclay and the men in Upper Canada try and attack Presque Isle by way of land, by going through Fort Meigs and Fort Stephenson near the Toledo area to get to Presque Isle to try to destroy Perry's squadron at Lake Erie before the squadron is done. They're not able to do it. Both attempts, both at Fort Meigs and at Fort Stephenson, are met with terrific defeat on the behalf of the British.
The American line of battle, seen at the bottom of this diagram, started with the Scorpion, the Ariel, the Lawrence, Caledonia, Niagara, Somers, Porcupine, Tigris, and Tripe in that order, to be matched up ship by ship against the British Chippewa, Detroit, Hunter, Queen Charlotte, Lady Prevost, and the Little Belt.
As Perry engages Barclay at close range, a serious dilemma strikes Perry. He looks at his squadron. Every commander knows his duty. Everyone knows what the order of battle is. As he looks behind him, he notices that the Niagara, the other large ship of his fleet, is at a tremendous distance behind him. And the Niagara is not appearing to come up into battle. Now, Perry and the Lawrence are stuck. The British ships train all of their fire on the Lawrence, and the casualty and loss of life and the destruction on the Lawrence is profound. There's only one officer, Lieutenant Yarnall, who is not wounded. By the time Perry gets ready to leave the Lawrence, there is not one gun left firing on board his flagship. He strikes his battle flag, the don't give up the ship flag, gets on board a rowboat, orders Lieutenant Yarnall to wait and strike the American colors at a later time. Because if they strike the American colors right now, that means the ship is surrendered and the battle's over. So if the American flag is left flying, the Lawrence is officially still engaged. Perry gets on the rowboat with a small squadron of men and row to the Lawrence, or the Niagara rather. When he gets to the Niagara, he gets on board, is met by Jesse Duncan Elliott, who is the captain of the Niagara. Elliott, who has not yet brought the Niagara into battle, is ordered to bring up the rest of the American squadron while Perry takes command of the Niagara itself. In the Battle of Lake Erie, there are many, many episodes or incidences of what we call Perry's luck. One of the greatest episodes was getting his ships over the sandbar at Presque. The second of these is in his early engagement in battle. For example, the wind is totally against Oliver Hazard Perry and his squadron as they are embarking and gaining speed against the British. The British have the weather gauge. The weather is in their favor. It is absolutely not for the Americans. And Perry and his squadron are constantly tacking bit by bit into the wind to get into range. Now, the other problem is all of the guns on the British ships are long-range guns. They can fire at a long distance. Oliver Hazard Perry and his squadron have very few long-range guns. They have what we call carronades, very short-range guns. So Perry has to close the distance, come into close range in order to do any damage against the British at all. If Barclay, the British commander, can keep Perry at a distance, he will be able to totally destroy the American squadron. Now, Robert Barclay was an excellent sailor. He had served with Commodore Horatio Nelson, for example, at the Battle of Trafalgar, where Horatio Nelson lost his life. At the Battle of Trafalgar, Robert Barclay is shot in the shoulder and loses his right arm. Robert Barclay, in the battle, suffers a serious wound halfway through. He is hit in his one remaining good shoulder, and before he is taken below deck to be operated on, he passes command over to his lieutenant. He goes below deck, but not before he sees Oliver Hazard Perry get on board a rowboat and leave the Lawrence, which is badly damaged, almost useless at this point in the battle. Get on the rowboat, he pulls down his great battle flag, the don't give up the ship flag, takes it to the Niagara that is yet to be engaged in battle. He sees this action and orders all of his British squadron to train all of their fire of their long guns on this little rowboat, and it is a miracle that Perry makes it from the Lawrence to the Niagara without being hit. The first thing he does is he raises his famous battle flag on board the Niagara and makes it now his flagship. The Lawrence, in the meantime, has really drifted out of the battle. It is in such bad shape. As soon as Perry brings the Niagara up into battle, Yarnall, the lieutenant on board the Lawrence, strikes the American colors, and the Lawrence is officially out of the battle. Perry brings the Niagara up into battle, followed by the remainder of the American squadron. In the meantime, while Robert Barclay has been taken below deck of his flagship to be operated on, the two major British ships, the Hunter and the Queen Charlotte, are going to attempt a nautical maneuver to turn so they can give a fresh broadside to the American ships coming up. As they turn, the Queen Charlotte gets caught in the rigging of the Hunter and the Detroit, and they are unable to move. This is the opportunity that Perry's been waiting for. Perry sees this, sails the Niagara right in the middle of the British line, and literally pours a devastating fire, a double broadside, into each side of the British squadron that now is literally helpless. As the Niagara sails through and does this, so does every subsequent American vessel, one right after the other. By the time the American squadron has split the British line, the British squadron is surrendering, piece by piece, ship by ship. There are 2 ships that attempt to get away. They are caught and brought back. This is the first and only time in the history of the world that an entire British squadron surrenders entirely in a nautical battle. Immediately after the battle, Oliver Hazard Perry pens a note to William Henry Harrison letting him know about the battle. In this note is the great quote, "Dear General, we have met the enemy and they are ours." Following this, he and General William Henry Harrison have a meeting around the area of Sandusky and Toledo, and they plan their next attack. And the next attack will be an invasion by land, by water actually, of Upper Canada. Oliver Hazard Perry will transport William Henry Harrison's ground troops from northern Ohio to Upper Canada. When the troops hit Upper Canada, the area around Amherstburg and Fort Malden, they engaged the British at a very important battle, the Battle of the Thames. At the Battle of the Thames, the great Indian chief Tecumseh is killed. With the death of Tecumseh, we see the destruction and the breaking of the British-Indian alliance in Upper Canada in 1813. There were many cartoons that were put out in the American and the British papers, as the one seen here, showing the King of England being harassed by Queen Charlotte, being offered a glass of Perry, which was Perry wine at the time, and the cartoon is clearly showing the frustration and the aggravation, and of course rubbing it in a little bit, of the British over this massive defeat and this great victory of the United States. After the Battle of Lake Erie, Congress and the American people hail Oliver Hazard Perry as a national hero. Congress orders a medal to be struck in his honor. Citizens gather money and raise funds to build monuments to Oliver Hazard Perry. There are dozens. There is one in Rhode Island, his home state. There is one in Presque, Pennsylvania, for the commemoration of his fleet and his squadron being built there, and it's there today. One of the greatest ones is in Cleveland, which originally was in Cleveland. It moved 3 different places in the history of its life. The original now is found in the National Park Visitors Center at Put-in-Bay on the Great Lake. A reproduction of the original can be found downtown Cleveland. And when you drive around downtown Cleveland, drive around Presque Isle on the square, you're in Rhode Island, you're up on Presque Isle, look for these monuments because they are there and they are still awesome reminders and tokens of the sacrifice, and the bravery, and the courage of all the men that fought on the Battle of Lake Erie, on the Great Lakes, in the War of 1812. One of the biggest things we need to take a look at with the Battle of Lake Erie is its impact on the world today. After the Battle of Lake Erie and the subsequent Treaty of Ghent, which ends the War of 1812, we have an extremely long period of peace between the United States and Canada. And if we take a look at Perry's Victory Monument today on Put-in-Bay on Lake Erie, we see a remembrance, a model of this open, peaceful border that has existed between the United States and Canada since 1814. And it has lasted till today. And we still have one of the largest peaceful borders anywhere in the world. And most of it is due to the Battle of Lake Erie and the effects of Oliver Hazard Perry and his men.
Chapter 7. The climate of Erie is typical of the Great Lakes. Erie is in the snow belt, stretching from Cleveland to Syracuse and Watertown. Accordingly, its winters are typically cold, with heavy lake-effect snow. Erie is 13th on the list of snowiest places in the United States, averaging 88 inches, 220 centimeters, annually. For the winter of 2007 and 2008, Erie received 119 inches, 301 centimeters, of snow.
Summers tend to be hot and humid. Erie is in the warm summer humid continental climate zone. Erie experiences a full range of weather events, including snow, ice, rain, thunderstorms, and fog.
Recommended videos, Erie.
Top 10 best tourist places to visit in Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie, PA. Presque, top 5 things to do.
Top 12. Best tourist attractions in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Table of Contents, Erie. Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.